Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to be doing a quick comparison between the Motorola G9 Play and the Motorola G8 Power. Now if you're in the market for a budget Motorola smartphone, these are two pretty good options for you. Now while they do share a few specs in common, there are a lot of differences. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the similarities that the G9 Play and the G8 Power share. Now to begin with, it's the build of the phones. Now both phones have a glass front, to be expected obviously, and they both have a plastic back, which is a glossy back. The G8 Power has a slight stripy sort of design to it. Other than that, they're your typical plastic back, glossy back, so of course they attract fingerprints. SIM tray on the left, power and volume rockers on the right, but the G9 Play does have a dedicated Google Assistant button, which the G8 Power doesn't, but I don't care. I never used it, I never have, and I probably never will use it. So for me, that's not the end of the world. They both support fast charging, around sort of the 18 to 20 watt range, which you can call it fast charging, but of course, in a world of 30 or 60 or 50 watt fast charging, it's not really that fast. And as for batteries, you get a 5000 milliamp battery on both of these phones, so all day battery life, no problem, maybe even a couple of days if you're a light user. And of course your fingerprint sensors on the back, which are just your normal capacitive fingerprint sensors, nice and responsive, and they can be remapped so you can swipe down on them to bring down your notifications rather than doing it on the screen if that's your bag. Right, so that's where the similarities end. Now let's talk about the differences, and for a start I'm going to talk about the design of the phone. So when I said that both of these phones are made of plastic, the G9 Play has a plastic frame, but in fact the G8 Power has an aluminium frame as well. So it's slightly upgraded to an aluminium frame, although to be honest, looking at the phone you probably wouldn't notice, you'd probably think that it was a plastic frame. It isn't until you look at the specs that it actually says that it has an aluminium frame. I didn't know until I looked at the spec sheet. Now screens, now there isn't any sort of Gorilla Glass protection noted on the specs for any of the Motorola phones that I've used, but they've been pretty durable. They don't come with a pre-applied screen protector, but there isn't any scratches or anything on the displays after using them without one. And the screen tech is slightly different on both of these phones. Now on the G9 Play, you have a 6.5 inch 720p display with around 260-ish pixels per inch. But this is upgraded to a full HD 1080p panel on the G8 Power. Although slightly smaller at 6.4 inches, it doesn't matter. I'd much rather have a higher resolution 1080p screen over a 720p display any day of the week. Now they're both 60Hz displays, so you're not sacrificing a high refresh rate if you pick one phone over the other. They both have a 60Hz display. Now if we go by the G9 Play selfie camera, you have an 8 megapixel selfie camera up the top in this little dewdrop design. And then if you go by the G8 Power, it's upgraded to a 16 megapixel sensor, but you get a little punch hole design up in the top. Either one for me, I'd probably sway more towards the punch hole design, whether it be in one of the corners or in the middle, than the dewdrop design on the screens. But it's all down to your personal preference. Let me know in the comments what you think. Might as well get a chat going. Now for internals, both of these phones have 4GB of RAM, 64GB of internal storage, both of which are expandable. The processors are different, although performance wise they're going to be basically identical. So you get a Snapdragon 662 processor in the G9 Play, which is a slightly newer version of the slightly older Snapdragon 665 that is found in the G8 Power. Now the G8 Power 665 is a couple of years old now, so they did a bit of a refresh and made the Snapdragon 662, but to be honest, they're very similar in terms of performance, and the Geekbench scores, if you're interested, are almost identical. So I wouldn't even worry. If you're looking at the G8 Power, the Snapdragon 665 is absolutely fine. You're not going to notice a difference between each phone in terms of everyday use. They're both running Android 11, and they both have a very stock Android experience, which is typical of all Motorola phones. So they're both running the newest software, but because the G8 Power is slightly older, you may find that it is going to be a bit slower to receive updates than what the G9 Play is, because it is just a little bit newer. But then Motorola aren't exactly the fastest at rolling out updates in general, so to be honest, you might be waiting a long time with either phone. But in terms of what they are now, I don't like to speculate too much on what you get in the future, but what they are now, they're both absolutely fine and perfect daily drivers for anybody who just wants a phone that works and that performs pretty well. And in what seems to be left until last on every YouTuber's reviews is the camera tech, and it's probably the area that people are more interested about in terms of the specs and how it performs. So the G9 Play comes with a triple lens setup, which consists of a 48 megapixel primary camera, which does pixel binning, so you get 12 megapixel default photos, and this is backed up by two 2 megapixel macro and depth cameras, and then of course you just get your LED flash in the position where you may have found a fourth camera, but unfortunately it's just 3 cameras on this phone. Now on the G8 Power, this is upgraded to a quad camera setup, and it's not your usual quad camera setup that you find on most budget phones these days. Let me explain. Now as for the main camera, you get a 16 megapixel f1.7 lens. This is backed up by an 8 megapixel f2.2 118 degree field of view ultra wide, and you do get a 2 megapixel macro camera as well. But what makes the G8 Power a very unique budget phone is the fourth camera is actually an 8 megapixel f2.2 telephoto lens with 2 times optical zoom. Now this is completely unheard of on budget phones these days. I don't know why Motorola decided to put a telephoto lens on this particular budget phone, but please keep doing it, because this is a really great versatile camera. Results are really good from this camera on all lenses. Obviously in low light it's going to suffer, and there's no night mode, so it's going to suffer more than others, such as the G9 Play, which does come with a night mode. But just having that extra versatility of that telephoto and the ultra wide is a big step up over the G9 Play personally. Even if the main camera may or may not perform as good as the G9 Play, I'd still rather have the versatility of those 2 extra lenses over just essentially a single camera on the G9 Play. Video on the G8 Power tops out at 4K at 30 frames per second, whereas unfortunately on the newer G9 Play you are restricted to just 1080p at either 30 or 60 frames per second. So this older phone has got quite a few upgrades over the G9 Play. And one of them, which I completely forgot to mention, I did say about both of them having speakers on the bottom, of course, but the G8 Power actually has stereo speakers, so you've got another speaker built into the earpiece, and that's another thing that the G8 Power has that the G9 Play doesn't. So that's my quick comparison between the G9 Play and the G8 Power. Personally, although it's older, I would definitely pick the G8 Power just for the stereo speakers. You've got a more sturdy aluminium frame, you've got that 1080p screen over the 720p, you've got 4K recording on the main camera, and then of course you've got that quad camera setup with that extra telephoto lens as well. So, but let me know in the comments what you think. Which one would you buy? Do you have one already? And if you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and put some comments on the bottom of this video to let me know your thoughts. And until next time, I'll see you in the next one.